So it's great to use just our body in mobility stretches because it requires no equipment and we can do them anywhere. But once we get to a certain point or movement competency through just general mobility stretches, we need to add things like load or weight to help increase range or increase the difficulty of the movement. Now we're going to go through some halos. Now we're going to challenge the halo today in tall kneeling and half kneeling. So that's working on maintaining hip extension and trunk stability with a dynamic portion of our shoulders moving. Now we can do these in standing and while we're upright going through the motion, but isolating by coming down into tall kneeling or half kneeling is really going to identify any trunk stability issues we have whilst our shoulders are dynamically moving through that halo motion. So we're going to go bottoms up on this kettlebell, chin starting with the bottom of the bell in line with it, and we're simply going to maintain a nice upright position, squeezing the glutes and passing that bell around the head. We're going to go back and forth and go for about 10 reps each side. And the idea here is getting the bulb of the bell, this big bit here, passing around the base of the skull or deeper as we go through the range. Let's take that to half kneeling now. Bell bottoms up. And we can switch sides once we've done about 10 reps. Go to the other side. That's going to really challenge that down to knee, so the stability of that knee that's on the ground in the hip, and we're also going to have to still maintain that nice stable posture, which if we start to take that to standing, we're looking at the sort of movements we could use this for that'll help us build more stability in our standing movements, such as running, lunging, split squatting, or jumping. Okay, pullovers. Great for increasing thoracic range of motion and testing a little bit of elementary shoulder stability, but most importantly, it is really good prep work for anything we do overhead. So we're going to show two variants today, one being on the ground with our kettlebell pullover and then on our bench with our dumbbell pullover. Word of warning here, only progress to a level you are confident and capable of achieving. So if you've got any restrictions or mobility issues you've already found, make sure they're all rectified and sorted out before you start loading overhead, particularly with weight. Now, starting in this position, we want a really light kettlebell. It's not so much about our weight in this particular instance, it's just about manipulating that position enough to increase range of motion. We've got an 8 kilo kettlebell here. We're going to go thumbs through with that bell resting on our wrists. We're going to lay on our back, and we're simply going to pin our sternum to the floor. So that'll stop our back arching and our thoracic coming off the floor. The idea is to keep our back on the floor at all times. And we're breathing in. And on the breath out, we're lowering down until we get in contact with the floor. Now, you won't see my ribcage flare here. It's pinned to the floor. It's under control. If we have this sort of thing happening, we've gone too far. So keeping the lower back forced into the floor, we lift that out of position. Breathing in, keeping that sternum pinned to the floor. Lowering down. Now, if we can't get to depth there, we simply only go as far as we can whilst maintaining that sternum pinned to the floor. And that's level 1 for our overhead increase with our pullover. Next stage, utilising a bench to increase the range that we can travel, using a dumbbell or a kettlebell, whichever works, for our next pullover series. So we're simply getting our thoracic onto that bench, head in contact, elbows locked, arms straight, dumbbell like so, and on the way down, we can start with lowering just the arms and coming back to that start position, or we can increase yet again and drop our hips. By keeping the head on the bench and maintaining your neck in a relaxed position so you're not grabbing tension through there. and we're pulling into the movement. So that's really going to help those movements where you've got to be in that overhead position for anything like squatting, clean jerk, snatch, any kettlebell work. And it's really important that you make sure you tick off all your mobility and trigger point before you try and jump into these positions to make sure you're safe, stable, and strong overhead. The final one we're going to show you is going to use that external weight variable to add a bit of challenge, and that's going to be the arm bar. There's a couple of setup tips we're going to take out of the Turkish get-up. The idea is to be able to maintain that nice loaded position, shoulder set, without that bell steering us around. So we're going to start. I'm going to show you the start position, then I'm going to change hands just so you can easily see this. I'm going to start on our side, the kettlebell at our stomach. We're going to shoot our bottom hand through and grab that bell like so. We are then going to bring that onto our back, and we're going to press that with two hands. Our hand should be over our shoulders here. Now from here, we're going to bring our arm up, and we're going to push to the roof and bring this knee across. So from here, from the back, you should see that nice stable shoulder. We shouldn't be pushing too high out of the roof. It should be set in its socket. And then once we're comfortable, we look away from the bell and we start that breathing. And when we roll onto the back, two hands, lower that bell and roll out. Now, to give you a look on the front side so you can understand where we're at, the idea, some movement is normal, it's fine. We keep our eyes on the bell until we're confident we can take our eyes away, so then we're focusing on just the feeling and not the vision. But the first starting element is keeping eyes on the bell, so when you see that move, you correct it. Now you should be able to keep a nice stable shoulder there without it trying to push around and without letting it disconnect like so. So let's look at the front angle now. Tip for young players, don't wear your watch. That's what I was just taking off just then. So driving up to the roof, bringing that leg across, then resting that ear on the bicep. Now we're breathing into here. Then when we have the confidence, we look away. Now you might notice a little bit of movement. That's actually okay. What it's doing is challenging the brain to maintain that correct position. But like I said, don't look away until you're confident and you can maintain this for a good 2 minutes without coming out of position. And as you can see, I can talk, I can maintain position, and I'm nice and stable. Rolling out, hands on the bell, lower down, roll out. There you have it, guys. Remember, don't wear that watch. That's what I have to take off. Otherwise, you'll be going to the watch shop for a brand new one. But there is some shoulder stability movements that are going to make your life a lot nicer if you're doing a lot of pushing and pulling and need to work on that postural control. The floor press. Now, really good exercise because we use, like our crocodile breathing, we use the floor as proprioceptive feedback. We can also help use it to brace our midsection. We can also do it single side, i.e. kettlebell, dumbbell. We can even use a barbell and we can go heavy on the movement. And then by keeping our back on the floor, we're also taking out the lower part of the range where we can throw into the movement. So we're isolating that arm control and that scap position, staying stable through the pushing movement. Now set up for our floor press, we're going to use a kettlebell. It doesn't have to be heavy, it can be light, and you can change it by adding weight or adding a barbell, a different bit of kit. We are simply going to put our bottom hand through that bell and roll over onto our back. Now the position for our elbow is 45 away from the body commonly. So we're here in this position, our other hand just goes palm up on the floor, and we can do legs extended or knees bent. So let's start with legs extended. So we've got no real purchase on the floor by gripping those feet, and we're simply bracing by that diaphragmatic breath that we've learnt through crocodile breathing, and we're pressing up. Hand or bell finishes above the shoulder, and under control, pressing back up. So our elbow just taps the floor and then we press up off the floor. So we shouldn't be resting down here, or if we do, we have to grab that breath again and pressing up. So this will allow you to keep that scap in position when you're going through your pulling movement, and it shortens the range. So people with shoulder issues like myself, I've had 14 dislocations and a reconstruction on this one. This restricted range floor press will allow you to press pretty heavy, keep your shoulder in a safe position, and then you can add the difficulty to your training through other pushing varieties as you feel confident and as you reach competency. So we have mobilised and we've stabilised for our shoulders and our pushing and pulling patterns. Now, this is about the time where we integrate our pulling and pushing movements into our training, and instead of going for the bland old push-up and teaching you the basics of that, let's try some more challenging versions of things that are going to step off from our floor press in our stabilisation section, that are going to challenge our single sides, our asymmetries, and our trunk stability and balance. The reason being is if we work on these harder exercises and variants, it should make things like push-ups a lot easier to achieve. Now, first of all, we're going to work with horizontal pushing, being the single arm bench press, which stems from our single arm floor press we've done. So simply challenging that anti-rotation component, i.e. not getting pulled off the bench, and working a single side, will have a great crossover for push-ups and our bench press on a barbell. So going into a loaded position, a lying position here, simply starting dumbbell above the shoulder, we're going 45 away, elbow 45 away, from the body, pressing up. So we're going into full range there and then driving up to that start position. Now, if you're someone with shoulder issues, we want to make sure we can go into full range before we start to press, and we are driving up like so. Now, that anti-rotational component is to not let you rotate off the bench before we get out into that top movement. Bracing through the core, or the midsection, and there we have it. So load that up as much as you need to feel the effects of it. Do these as a warm-up before you go into your barbell bench press, push-ups and things like that. That isolates the sides, it highlights any issues with your scapular patterning or your shoulder mobility that you need to address. Go back, address those through the trigger point and mobility section, and then reintegrate that back into a training. You should notice those fixed position, i.e. barbell or push-up movements should become a lot easier. Vertical pushing, unlike horizontal pushing, it is going to put more demand on our shoulder mobility and stability overhead. So before we start, make sure we've gone through the clearing and the testing, the mobilisation work and our stability work to make sure we're strong overhead. Loaded carries, things like that, where you're carrying things over your head in a static or fixed arm position are super handy. But let's go through a couple of pressing varieties with the kettlebell, which will help improve your overhead stability. Now, we're going to start in our tall kneeling stance again. So we're going to challenge trunk stability whilst moving dynamically through the shoulders before we take it to standing. Now, we're going to get that belt, and we're simply going to get it into this start position. Our forearms vertical and our wrist is pushed against the bell, and our wrist doesn't pull back against the bell either. We're pulling away from that kettlebell. Now from here, bracing through the midsection, we're going to follow that J curve or that J pattern to that overhead position. Bicep in line with the ear, coming back down and back into position like so. We can then take that into a half kneeling position where we simply raise a knee and press overhead. Now, it's not about going too heavy here, it's about following that nice natural pattern of the shoulder. And pressing comfortably, same way you go down is the same way you come up. Now this is going to isolate obviously this hip, and if we have trouble stabilising when we're pressing overhead, we want to lower that weight and make sure we have no real big hip shift that's compensating for a particular reason. Now, let's work about functioning that grip strength in that overhead press. Now, this is the bottoms up press. The reason why we do this, by grabbing that bell in a bottoms up position, it functions our grip strength, which causes a principle called irradiation, meaning gripping here gives us strength through the chain to allow us to press the bell. Simple principle of squeezing. We can also use the opposite hand to squeeze, grabbing more tension, giving us more pressing ability. This will also highlight particularly that shoulder stability and mobility because we're using more force through the press. Now, the bottoms up press, the trick to setting up is getting on top of that bell. Now, if we've got greasy hands, that's going to be hard. Chalk works very well here. We can get on top of the bell, and the idea is that wrist is forcing into the bell handle. You can see that direct straight line there. So once we force into the bell, we're going to adopt that push-up position to make sure we are in position there. Now, without releasing that grip we've just established, we're going to hike that belt into that start position and press. And bringing it down under control. Now, the trick isn't weight with this particular press. You need to be able to function that grip to keep that bell vertical. Now, if that bell slips or you lose it out of position, just go to a lighter bell. Chalk up, make sure those hands are nice and dry, and go from there. Work slowly and increase the weight as you can maintain that grip strength throughout. You will definitely know you'll have a stronger side out of left and right. So take your time to get into that nice strong starting press position. Find out which is your weak side. Work that appropriately. Don't go heavy early because that bell's just going to fall out. The bell will simply trigger that grip strength to release and it'll fall by the wayside if it's too heavy. Now, the other press we can work, which is all about that lat shelf and making sure we've got that strong lat position in our press, is our waiter's press. Now, bringing that bell up, remember it's not about weight, but if we've got a heavier bell, we can hike it into position here where we're like so. Now, the wrist is directly under the bulb of that bell and our lat is switched on. So from here, pressing overhead, we can see we're in that waiter's position. And this is why it's called a waiter's press. So coming back down and pressing overhead. Now, the trick is to not let that bell fall out left and right because we don't have the grip right around it. And coming out under control. Now, that'll work that lat shelf. Remember, it's not about weight as such. It's more about efficient movement through the position. You can regress that bottoms up press and that waiter's press to tall kneeling and half kneeling if you want to really slow it down and work that nice smooth range. There's your pushing varieties for your overhead press.